Hey everyone, it is great to see you all again. There are few things that you can do wrong in an art form like photography. Now there are things that you can do that may not yield you the best results for certain scenarios. However, there is one piece of photography advice that we've all heard at least once in our life. One that is objectively incorrect, but one that can also limit your creativity when trying to capture a certain photograph. In today's video, we are going to bust the myth that using ISO 100 will always allow you to capture the best photo possible. And stick around to the end where I show you what my settings were for these photos. I hope you all enjoy. My name is Jalen Oban. I'm a landscape photographer and educator based in the Pacific Northwest. I create weekly videos giving you photo tips or taking you with me on location to give you a behind the scenes look at what I do. If you enjoy the content, I would really appreciate it if you gave it a like and subscribe. Before we start, let's get this straight. There is some confusion with the pronunciation of what we're talking about today. Some people say ISO and others refer to it as ISO. Technically, the International Standard Organization, ISO, created this word ISO and clearly refers to it as being pronounced that way. However, for the sake of your and my photography career, ISO is just fine. But now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about what ISO is. ISO is a way to control your camera's sensor sensitivity to light. So the higher the number is, the more sensitive your camera is going to be. Think of raising ISO like raising gain on a speaker. When you raise the gain, you are amplifying the volume of all of the noises in your music or sound that you are listening to. However, you can push this too far and can start to create what is called distortion in your audio. This is the same when increasing ISO as a setting. ISO in digital photography refers to the amplification of the signal that the camera's sensor receives when capturing an image. Noise in this context refers to the random variation of brightness or color information in images, which can make your photos appear grainy or, as we call, noisy. This is completely different from aperture and shutter speed, which physically allows more light to touch your camera sensor. Instead of allowing more light to hit your sensor, ISO electronically brightens up your image. Now let's get this clear. ISO does not create noise, it only reveals the noise that would otherwise be hidden in a well-exposed image. Every image has noise present, however, having good lighting allows your camera to mask this because it doesn't have to electronically brighten up your image. To prove my point, look at these two images for example. The one on the left was shot at an incredibly high ISO but correctly exposed, and the other one was shot using a lower ISO but is extremely underexposed. When I raise the shadows of the underexposed image, you can see the amount of noise present can be even more than the properly exposed scene with a higher ISO. But how is this possible when we're using such a low ISO? This is because it doesn't create the noise, but only reveals the noise that's already present in your image. Note that every camera brand and sensor size is going to handle high ISO and low light situations differently, so experiment a bit with your specific camera and some lenses that you have to see how far you're able to push it until it's too far or noisy. That being said, most modern cameras tend to handle high ISO very well. Now, this does not mean that you should be strictly using high ISO all the time. When in a situation where you're able to keep your ISO low and capture an image with an aperture and shutter speed that you want while keeping your scene properly exposed, you should. ISO should only be adjusted when you're not able to physically get more light into your camera's sensor. For example, in midday light or when your camera is on a tripod. Scenarios like these, you have the most control over your shutter speed and aperture, and you're able to achieve a proper exposure with just those two settings. When you're shooting a landscape or a still subject and using a tripod, you're able to slow down your shutter speed to gather enough light without raising your ISO. But what if you're using a longer focal length lens and trying to shoot a bird at sunset when you want to freeze the motion but the light is fading? You have two options. Either you go home and don't take the shot, or you raise your ISO and increase your shutter speed so you can lock in that subject. Another example of when you might need to increase your shutter speed with the light being low is when you're shooting sports, especially indoors. A perfect example of a situation where you would need to increase your shutter speed and also close your aperture, in turn gathering less light, is when shooting waves, especially when using a telephoto lens. In order to capture all of the beautiful detail in the waves, a shutter speed of 1/1000th of a second or even faster may be necessary. When using an ISO of 500 to 800, you're able to balance out the exposure to your needs. With the abundance of noise reduction softwares out there, using higher ISOs have become more and more practical in recent years. If you'd like to learn more about noise reduction tools and how to properly use them without overdoing it, I have a video explaining exactly how to do this right inside of Lightroom. I'll have that linked above if you're interested. Another crucial situation where you may need to bump down your shutter speed along with bumping up your ISO is when you're shooting handheld, especially when the light is scarce. In order to capture a crisp, sharp handheld image, you want to use a shutter speed that is double your focal length. Of course, this isn't the end-all be-all of advice, this is just a good rule of thumb. When shooting at 100 to 400 millimeters, getting a sharp, crisp image can be tough. Raising your ISO to compensate is a must-do so you don't encounter soft photos due to camera shake. So now that we've talked about what exactly ISO is and how to use it, let's talk about a couple of ways you can preserve those details and mask out some of that noise. Firstly, like we talked about, using a post-production noise reduction software can remove the noise and retain detail. The second way is to not crop into your photo too much. When you zoom in, that just exaggerates and zooms into the noise, and that's not what you want to do. Try framing the shot the best that you can on location when using a higher ISO. Another way to mask the noise is to shoot a scene that the noise almost blends into what you're shooting. Like this scene, for example, where the sharp details of the spraying water helps retain the noise. Using minimal post-processing noise reduction allows me to show all of the detail, even when zooming in. But I hope you all learned something from this week's video. If you didn't already know, I started a Discord server for the entire community to come together, share photos, and give feedback. And then at the end of every month, I will be selecting one of your photos to feature as a monthly contest winner. And thank you to all the newer members of that Discord server. I really appreciate you joining. Other than that, if you could subscribe to my weekly newsletter for weekly updates, and then for vlog, blog, and other video updates, if you could like and follow my Facebook page. Other than that, I hope you all enjoyed. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.